Okay, guys, here I am on a Saturday night. Kurt Ranowski, Yankee Team News, your resident big mouth who has a few things to say about the world in which we live. Where's Archie Bunker when we need him? Anyway, so I just got in from a wedding, and it was a happy wedding. It was a good wedding. I wish the best for the bride and the groom. But I am driven, I am compelled to comment on something. The bride had a huge tattoo on her right arm. And I asked her what it was. She said, Cersei. Well, I didn't ask her how long it's been there, but funny we should have this movie that's a summer hit, Odyssey, which is turning out to be we'll call it a box office hit, but it's a critical failure on a lot of fronts. Um, Richard Nolan, if that's the director's name, has tried too hard to please, quite frankly, all the wrong people and has totally lost the narrative with respect to true meaning of the whole idea of the Odyssey, starting with the concept of moral character. He blew it. In any event, so she blew it too, standing there with a tattoo of Cersei on her arm. And my reaction was, well, I believe Cersei was not what you would call a good witch. Her response was that Cersei got a bum rap. Well, what she meant by Cersei getting a bum rap was that you had feminists who decided to, quote, retell the story and make the bad witch into a good witch and blame men for being predatory as to why she was perceived as a bad witch. Okay, this, of course, should spark any number of logical questions. So I think the phrase retellings in the plural was used, retellings. Now, what becomes the question here? Which retelling is the accurate retelling? Since when is the feminist interpretation of the Odyssey somehow the right one, the better one, the more correct one somehow? I'm not buying it, okay? Especially when you consider that feminism comes at social relations from a very definite point of view, which I would definitely not call constructive. I just want to add, for those who follow this, that there is a striking number of women who, if you look hard enough, you will find online crying their hearts out because they can't find a man. And dear, you can't find a man because the men are too smart. You can say men never get things right, but this we get right. When you're sitting there complaining about men and holding yourself blameless in some fashion, this is a bad sign for what is supposed to be a relationship, or what women seem to prefer to call a partnership. Now, there's a word that really sticks in my craw. To take marriage and call it a partnership, all you're doing is playing into the hands of the state, because the state does not look at marriage as anything other than a business partnership. So the state thinks of a marriage in terms of when marriages end, and then you have the parting of physical assets for the most part. Anyway, so there she is with this tattoo. It's rather large. I would say it was like that. And it's clear to me that she has no intention of ever removing that. So, and then the other part that makes it fun. So, for people who might be, say, a little more Christian in their persuasion, it was a disturbing thing because it was clear that she's gone down the path of what might be called New Age philosophy, for lack of a better term. But, look, if you get into things like tarot readings and palm readings and crystal balls and mediumship and all these other things, you might want to take a closer look at just what the hell you're doing, because you may find some things that make you decidedly uncomfortable and wake you up to the fact that you need to reverse course, quite simply. Another argument that I would make is if you have Cersei on your arm and you're all into New Age / pagan stuff, you are choosing, in my humble opinion, a lesser, more superficial form of spirituality. All right, to get there, you have to think long and hard about what constitutes spirituality, the spirit, the life of the soul. What is that? And is it what you think it is and nothing more? Maybe it's more than what you think it is. That is the suggestion you might want to consider. And that's the suggestion that feminists might want to consider. Now, within feminism, yeah, you're going to find quite a range of views. The most simple, of course, is the complaint about the patriarchy, okay, and suggesting that a matriarchy is somehow better than a patriarchy. And then some others might say, oh, no, we mean a more balanced view, but do you really? Do you really? I would like to see your notes. And then you have those who are more political in their analysis of feminism. So, as is the case, so Betty Friedan, who was one of the early, quote, feminist writers, she was a Marxist. And many of the people who work with her are also Marxists. So it's a mistake to just kind of give the slide to the role of Marxism in shaping feminism. It's here. Let me just take a second while I'm talking. I would be interested to know, let's see here, I'm putting in the search term, non-Marxist feminists. There was Paglia, was their name? Let's see here. There might be some famous. All right. This is very interesting. The idea that there's a non-Marxist feminism, it is not showing up on the first pass with an internet search. So there you go. Feminism is going to be largely, massively Marxist in its outlook. So if it's Marxist, then we're talking about cultural Marxism and all the things that go with it, critical race theory, critical theory. It's probably critical feminist theory for all I know, which I haven't really looked at. And they all end up in the same kind of weird place, which is, I'm sorry, in my humble opinion, intellectually pretty half-assed. They, in order to make their point, they have to surrender certain arguments. They have to surrender certain positions, because otherwise, if they took them, they would lose the argument. So, gee, ain't that just a crying shame? Okay, and what else do I want to say about feminism before I move on to these other things? I think the thing I want to just re-emphasize is that feminism has probably done more to poison relationships between men and women than anything else I can think of. And part of it is that I guess there is this argument, right? We hear this all the time about, equality and fairness. The notion is equality and fairness somehow go together. Now, so let me ask a strange rhetorical question. If you have one of the core arguments, right, in feminism is equality in pay. If a man and a woman are doing the same job, they should get exactly the same pay. So let's just accept that for the moment. Does it end up being fair? Because there are many other factors that go into a job than just money. Okay, your performance, time on the job. Okay, you have, and then the other part. It's called, now you've earned this money. What are you doing with it? How are you investing it? So is it? And then, by the way, would there be some weird counter argument that there are cases where women should earn more than men? I'm waiting for an answer on that. But I think if you look at the facts, because more women than men have been going to college and women are landing more, quote, professional jobs, yes, many women are out earning men. But is that considered unfair? No, I don't know. Maybe we have to take a closer look at that too. So the sense is that you have, well, the point I want to get to is that while you have a certain sense of what constitutes equality or fairness, quote, you may find that sense is not really honored in the breach, all right? It's just a basic human reality. In relationships between people, there will always be someone who dominates and someone who quote, submits or follows. And it doesn't matter whether you're male or female. This is just how it goes. Now, feminists, of course, will complain that men are predatory and toxic and expect to dominate all the time. But you know what? I think there are quite a few men who could straighten you out on that and indicate otherwise. So I would say you need to, again, consider the idea of equality in terms of real relationships over time under different circumstances. Just to call this as a high-sounding guiding principle comes up a little short in reality. Just my opinion. We'll see the other part of this that we want to add to here. You know, the other thing, you might as well deal with it, is that when feminists are busy talking about these things, it has to be considered in terms of what happens in America versus other cultures. So I find it very interesting. There was a little video clip once, this woman who had gone to Germany and spent some time there. And what she discovered is that in Germany, quite literally, quote, chivalry is dead. And she used as her case in point that when she was traveling through airports and she realized she was kind of a nut, but she had, count them, four pieces of luggage that she was carrying. One woman carrying 4 pieces of luggage. What do you think? It's kind of be a struggle. In America, men helped her out. Said she's trying to get from one place to another. But when she got to Germany, they just looked at her as a crazy woman. What are you doing carrying 4 big things of luggage through an airport? This is crazy. And none of them offered to help. Okay, that was just for openers. German men don't hold a door open for women. They don't try to, extend themselves in any way. All of this is a product, okay, of an intense focus on the so-called equality of the sexes. And look at what it gets you. It gets you a cold society that does not at all have any human regard for each other, regardless of gender, even though you supposedly focused on gender. I think something got lost in the translation quite frequently. Quite my opinion. And if we come back to America again, if it's not about equality of sexes and travel and chivalry, okay, it's about all the other things that constitute common sense human decency. And you just don't see the same kind of problem. Remember when the people came over from Europe for FIFA, for the soccer matches, and they couldn't believe how friendly and helpful Americans were. Of course, this was created by the false impression from our hateful liberal media. And so now they had to deal with the fact that we were friendly, and in some ways more friendly than their fellow brethren back in Europe. Another little confusing point to consider. So is there something else in there that needs to be explored? Not now necessarily, but I think we can recognize that the countries in Europe are, quote, more liberal than here in America, although we certainly have more than enough liberalism stewing around. Yeah, so anyway, I'm going to let that go for now. So now I want to talk about my next big topic, which is signs of pushback in Connecticut. So I'm not going to pretend to know just what is going on in other countries. Other states in the nation. But the sense that there is corruption of all kinds in all places looks pretty extensive. And slowly but surely, the first reaction is say, oh, it's conservatives pushing back against liberals in an overly liberal state. But I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, no, this is people pushing back against a state which has been liberal for a long time, but has developed so many practices that can be qualified as corrupt, incompetent, insensitive, out of touch, and you take your pick. But of course, we're focusing on election integrity as a big example, but it's not the only one. Okay, the way education is being conducted, And now, as the spotlight begins to focus on a certain government agency in Connecticut called the Department of Children and Families, we're going to find out, they're not everything they're cracked up to be, which will lead to a whole bunch of other problems. Okay, so the sense is that yes, more organizations and groups. I'm certainly seeing them. Trump, people in Connecticut for Trump, Take Back Connecticut. Election. There must be at least 3 election integrity channels of different kinds. ConnecticutCoalition.com, which is focusing on election integrity, but there will be other things, family issues as well. And so there's a sense that they're kind of, it's what I've seen over the last several years is going through waves. Okay. There is what I consider to be a healthy response in this state, Connecticut, that is based upon the belief that there should be integrity, there should be honesty, there should be something that constitutes a proper, well-run government in the state of Connecticut. State level, local level, we ain't got it. We ain't got it. And the degree to which it's worse than we thought is being discovered bit by bit. And I will, for the moment, use as the most recent example. There's actually 3, but I'll start with the 2. We have the lovely town of Milford, Connecticut, okay, along the coastline, not far from New Haven on the west side. They had an emergency meeting concerning flock cameras. And you had hundreds of people turn out to testify against these flock cameras. Dramatic pause. While this was going on, okay, the mayor or first selectman of Milford was sitting there wearing earbuds and looking at his phone. He ignored, let's see, Evil Empire, CPS is the biggest facility, yes it is. Well, Child Protective Services. No, wait, there's DCF and CPS. Evil Empire 4466 will have to explain in greater detail here. I think of DCF as the problem. And yes, I have heard this. The research they've had right now, at least so far, just so we're clear, is one individual who we shall say is acting as a rogue worker within DCF who's been responsible for some of this stuff. That doesn't mean there's not more. I'm pretty damn sure there's a lot more. So what am I going to say about that? We need to do more investigation. That's what it means. Not enough people are stepping up to the plate on this one, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm guilty as accused. Guilty as accused on this. It is something which absolutely needs to be dug into. And then even back to Milford. So the mayor, let's say it was the mayor, totally ignored all these people. Could not have been more disrespectful. Could not have demonstrated more arrogance. Okay. The board that was listening is evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, 6-6. When the vote at the end of the evening came, one of the Republicans sided with the Democrats, and it was 7 for keeping the cameras, 6 against. Now, you just had a whole group of people stand up and make their case against it. You would think that the will of the people would count for something, but no, not to them. Meantime, down the street in Norwich, Connecticut, we have a gentleman, Mr. Singh. He is what is called a Sikh. A Sikh is not a Hindu. A Sikh is not a Muslim. It's a different religion, Eastern religion altogether. Pretty much germane to India, but I think it has some influences from Islam. In any event, so he's the mayor, and the public was getting real testy, and he put the hammer down and started having people thrown out left and right. So there was no basis for discussion. There was no effort to deal with the issues that had people so worked up. So again, I'm sorry, you have one kind of tyranny taking place in Milford, where the guy is arrogant and ignoring people. And then you have another kind of tyranny going on in Norwich, where the mayor there is freely throwing people out and probably arresting some of them as well. Is justice being done? Are the issues being confronted in any real way? No. What you have in both cases is a government that's saying, screw you, we'll do whatever we want. Well, you know, and I know we cannot have that. That will not last for very long. Okay, so let's face it, this particular battle, our side lost, blow a retreat. Now we're going to go back and reorganize ourselves and come up with a new plan of attack. I just want to mention, by the way, that I didn't realize that somebody made this point. The nature of World War II, and I guess other wars, is like this as well, where there's this constant back and forth where new strategies are being developed. You try something, it fails, you come back, you come up with another idea, you try that, doesn't work, go back again, try again until finally something works. And whoever gets there first with something works, I guess he gets to be the winner. There you go. Anyway, what's this now? Evil Empire 4466. Oh, look at how many children go missing. Yes, I know, absolutely. So, and this is the other thing. I see these numbers. Let's be fair. Let's be fair. We want to verify. We want to have at least 2, if not 3, independent sources that can establish for us what those correct numbers are. And if the case is that we're not quite sure, well, let's get that data out there too. Why should it be so uncertain? Why would there be this kind of confusion? It just adds to the incompetence of these agencies. Yeah, it's a god-awful mess. It's a god-awful mess. And I hope, I'll just mention in passing, there's something I like to call the battle board, and I want to put it up some night. It really breaks it. Yes, it identifies all the different areas of battle. It identifies who's fighting and where. And from this battle board, we're supposed to get a sense of how we're doing. Okay. Now, what I would say as a general observation, since I see, signs of pushback in Connecticut. Yeah, I'm still on the subject. Good to know. That there are certain areas where we can say that there continues to be reasonable success. So let me just take a minute and talk about the Second Amendment. Okay. The leading organization that protects the Second Amendment in Connecticut is the CCDL, the Connecticut Citizens Defense League. They have done an outstanding job. They have remained laser focused, okay, on legislative members when it comes to various bills that are being considered. So, banning silencers or suppressors, I guess they call them. And then, trying to ban Glocks and then trying to ban, quote, assault type weapons, which is such an ignorant thing. But yes, so these are examples of areas in which we continue to fight. Now, I would say, it's to the CCDL's benefit that there's a national trend. Okay, what do we got here? They are born from settlement of Pale. The settlement of Pale. I don't know what that is. Get your research up to date. They worship. Oh, okay. No, I'm not questioning that. No. Dude. Okay. If they are, how do we want to put this? Let's draw a distinction here. All right. We are confronted, Evil Empire 4466, with at least 2 versions, okay, of what we will simply refer to as pedophilia that infests our so-called child care, child protective system. First, we'll just call it rank pedophilia. These are sick people who want to use children for sexual purposes, okay? And there are many who are considered rich and powerful who are in that group. So that they would be in a position to abuse DCF or CPS? Absolutely. Okay. Meantime, you have the second group that's being discussed. And, again, I'm like, you have to understand when you start to mix religion into this, whether it's Satanism or something else, it just gets more difficult to prove. All right. I'm just going to say, yes, there are witnesses. Yes, we've heard stories. Okay. Yes, we hear about survivors. I get it. But we still have to be certain as possible about the information we're dealing with. We don't want to look like idiots and fools. Just saying. Okay. All right. Anyway, Evil Empire, they're born from settlement of Pile. Get your research up to date. They worship Baal. I don't doubt that. I will just throw in, for example, when why am I drawing a blank on his name? Mr. Jones. Let's just say Mr. Jones had snuck into Bohemian Grove that time many years ago, and from within the bushes was able to show what appeared to be a bunch of people around this huge statue with a fire. There's the arms of this thing, and there's a fire in it, and they're worshiping what would have been Baal. Okay, I'm calling that evidence. All right, but how extensive is it? How common is it? Do they worship Baal once a month, once a year, seasonal? Where they've got Baal holidays? What's going on? We need to have more and better information, in my opinion. It doesn't take away from the fact that these people are screwed up. And whoever goes to Bohemian Grove, I regard as suspicious, just so you know. Okay. Meantime, where was I? All right. So, with respect to the Second Amendment, the point I wanted to make is that national trends, okay, are moving in the direction that supports the CCDL in Connecticut. There's been a string of Supreme Court rulings, okay, and there are more rulings coming down the pike. Yes, but meantime, that's right. The liberals keep pushing back. They keep filing new suits, one kind of after another. On at least one occasion, so-called Governor Hochul has basically told people, screw you, we're going to slam down the Second Amendment no matter what. So you have this ongoing battle. But I'm referring to them as an example of a group that's been particularly effective. I would say number 2 in that list would be the Connecticut Family Institute, or simply the Family Institute. So that's good old Wolfgang. So the thing that's interesting about the Family Institute, that they have sort of these connections with other groups, and which is what we need, by the way. But still, you find that we don't have enough influence, if you will, within the halls of power in Hartford, such as it is. So, what pushback there should be? We need to have a citizens lobby. We don't have a citizens lobby. There should be people representing the average ordinary Joe, the taxpayer, the voter, whoever, and be there in the halls influencing legislators on various kinds of legislation. And by the way, the other point I need to make for all the people in my community who've been complaining, as they should, my criticism of us is this: we do not have enough positive proposals. We have not crafted enough ideas for legislation that constitute policy for Connecticut as we see it needing to be run. Now, that said, people like Rob Sampson and others have continued, and Tina Korpis and others have put forth legislation that the Democrats just trash and show no interest in. All right. Meantime, the other part here, and it's a bigger problem, this comes back to the main point that I'm trying to make here, and that is that Connecticut is in such bad shape politically, governmentally, financially. It's just, in any event, there is a lawsuit. We have not been, there are 2 lawsuits actually from the federal government. One we've kind of paid attention to, of course, is pushing back against the state's use of sanctuary cities, which our Attorney General, Mr. Tong, blows hot and cold on constantly. Ain't working, Tony, babe, ain't working. Just telling you. Meantime, the second thing that we're not paying attention to is the lawsuit that's been brought against the legislature for basically violating their own rules. That's putting it as simply as possible. Now, in violating their own rules, they have passed laws. The argument hasn't been made strong enough, in my opinion, but they're passing laws which are unconstitutional. So, for example, if we take the recent homeschooling law that was passed, Deb Stevenson and the National Homeschooling Legal Defense Association, is that got it right? In NHLSDA, has either they have or they're about to file a suit that argues that this law that attacks homeschooling parents is unconstitutional and violates a federal law. So this is the kind of stuff, when I look at this, I'm standing back and going, all right, on the one hand, wasn't this brought up in the legislative session by the Republicans? I don't know. Seems like they should have. Maybe they did, and it got so quickly buried, we just never heard anything about it. I don't know. I don't know. So, Rob, I need you to talk to me. What's this? They have been sacrificed. Yeah. In fact, look, Evil Empire 4466. Look, okay, now you're making a different point. Can we be clear on this? You're making a different point. A point that has, well, nothing to do with America. Okay? The way we started out here is that people in power are abusing their position and sacrificing, mutilating, exploiting children in some fashion as people in positions of power. Okay? This argument, if I may, goes well beyond the formation of this country. Okay? So maybe it's a different argument. I don't know. I wish somebody would talk with me on this. Where are you guys? You're not here. But if you've had a long history across cultures, across continents, across time, where it's standard practice to sacrifice children to some deity, that's a different creature. That's not America. That's not evil, sick people in positions of power. That's part of some other tradition that spans time. I'm kind of in the camp that says who's ever in this country is doing it, there's something deeply wrong with them, which is not to be confused with this point here about it being a practice that's gone back for thousands of years. I see these as two different points. So anyway, I don't know if Evil Empire 4466 would like to rejoin on this matter. Okay. Let's see here. Look up the name stealers in history. Name stealers. Name stealers. I'm not sure what you mean by name stealers, but maybe you'll explain. Okay, so I've gotten through CCDL. I've talked about Family Institute. Then there's another group to talk about, which is Yankee Institute. And they have been a successful practitioner of lobbying the state legislature for many years when it comes to taxes and related issues. Now, they have, I'm going to say it. There was a period about 10, 15 years ago where Yankee Institute was kind of on the deathbed. In their heyday, they had about 10 people who were doing various forms of investigation and writing policy and communicating with legislators and such. And they almost went out of business, but they managed to bring themselves back. And in my opinion, they're stronger than ever. So that's good. So they're another example in Connecticut of people who are managing to push back against the evil communists who run our state government. Now, what is this? They are the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, melons. You mean like green melon and orange melon? What do you mean melons? I think you mean melons with two L's. Carnegie's, misspelled, Vanderbilt's, they made us go to the Fed. No, right. I have Evil Empire 4466. I appreciate your comments, but we're kind of sliding sideways here. Okay, you're tempting me to go into these other areas here. They made us go to the Fed. Yes, and the Khazarians. I know. We've talked. All right. I don't know. Here's the problem I'm having with this. I'd love to talk about these things. I'd love to dig in on them. But there comes a point where I've said what I want to say about it, maybe raise a few questions, and then we need to move on to the next horrible thing that's being done to us. But no, research the names, the Khazarians. Yes, I know. I'm beginning to suspect who this evil empire person might be, but I'm not sure. Maybe he will reveal himself to me later. Okay. All right, the other group here, the one which I cheer for the most, have the greatest hope for, and do what I can to help out, is what we'll call the election integrity community. And there is a community in Connecticut of people that do this. Linda Sinkowitz. It's funny. Linda Sinkowitz really started it, in my humble opinion. I don't think there was anybody else on the scene back in 2018 who was working to deal with this. But she made incredible sacrifices and commitments to push this forward. And in the course, she drew a lot of people in to work with her. And for better or for worse, some of those people may not have proven to be her friends, but they're equally dedicated to integrity issues. So then we have now this other sort of community that started to grow, and they've sort of slotted themselves into different areas of responsibility. And then you have others who look at these people that I'll refer to as the leading lights, and they do what they can to support them. So from where I sit, I see, let's see, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, maybe more, but I'll say at least 6 people who are devoted to fighting for election integrity in this state. And the other one I want to mention is Linda D'Alessio. Okay, she has been maniacally focused on pounding home the fact that in the 2024 election there was well over 200,000 votes cast, for which shall we say there was no explanation. Okay, those were votes that were cast. 230,000 more votes cast. Recorded than there were votes that are actually cast by voters. So of course, what you point to is the use of the dead people on those voter rolls. And the other dirty trick, of course, is that you develop a special list, you sequester that list of those people who hardly ever vote at all. But oh gee, in this election, suddenly they've woken up and they decided they're going to vote. And that, by the way, that little trick has been the subject of some court cases, just so you know. Okay, thank you for your podcast. Let's see now. No, get into the facts of the people that run our world. Good night. Thank you for your podcast, and Christ is King. Well, got that right. Okay, but look, dude, you're the guy who just brought up, it is funny, the one who's suggesting all these people across the world who sacrifice children. Okay, not all people who sacrifice children necessarily run the world. That would especially be the argument if you're talking about different cultures, different places, and different times. If we limit our discussion to what has been going on in this country, it is far more likely that the people we're talking about are those so-called rich and powerful people running our world. So I'm just making that point again, okay? In any event, all right, so I was talking about Linda Sinkowitz, Linda D'Alessio, Marie, I'm trying to remember her name, and there was another person I can't think of. In any event, the fact still remains that, oh yes, and I believe there's a lawsuit, maybe it's a third federal lawsuit about getting the voter rolls. So the blue states in particular have been resistant about providing their voter rolls. So for those who haven't been following this, let me remind you, Connecticut is a particularly screwed up case, all right? There's a group, it's called ERIC. It means Electronic Record Information Center. Boy, if there wasn't a more generic, meaningless title, I can't think of it. But there it is. The purpose of ERIC, the advertised purpose of ERIC, is to provide ultimately authoritative, cleaned up voter rolls for every state in the union. Okay, just to set the stage for you. So this ERIC started to show up about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. Somebody got curious and said, well, you know what? So first, okay, so here's Eric, the phone number. Call him, you don't get anybody. So then he goes to, I believe it was Washington, D.C. or nearby Alexandria, check the address. And so there is an office in this building that was supposedly Eric, and there was nobody there, as in nobody. So what is this with a widely advertised national organization promising to do a fundamentally important function for all the states in the country, and you can't find anybody? Somebody's got to explain that to me. Wow. All right. So there's clearly something wrong. And so people started to dig into Eric more. And what it comes down to is that, face it, if you're trying to understand how data is organized in this country, uh, let's talk about data brokers. Okay. So you, Mr. Jones, have gone to your local appliance store and you filled out a card for a new refrigerator that you just bought. So you put in all this contact information in your warranty card, but you didn't know that you didn't have the option to tell that company you cannot share this information with anybody else. So the appliance company turns around and sells that information to a data broker. Okay. Wait a second. That data broker could also find out, wait, I can find education records online about this person. Okay, so now they've got this warranty card, your education records, they've got information, your driver's license, your voter roll. And they get creative and they start looking in other corners. Okay, there can be public federal databases, and they just pull all this information into one place, right? And they sell it to the highest bidder. Okay, now by the same token, you have the federal government, for example, complete records of everybody who served in the military, millions and millions of people. They have their Social Security information database, okay? They have voter information they pull together themselves, all right? And then anything else that could be deemed public information is in some federal government database somewhere. By the way, for all you conspiracy theorists out there, I would be remiss if I did not add, that's right. The FBI, if there's one thing the FBI loves to do, like the CIA, is it's collect information on people. So it was kind of whispers like, yeah, it's true. I don't want to admit it, but it's true. That the FBI has ongoing collection of data on every single American in this country and people who don't belong here as well. Well, doesn't that get interesting, right? Okay, so that's another body of data to consider, which may be accessed by other means and then shared. And by the way, one of the worst things to have, I cannot count the number of times where I read these articles and I was going, oh God, you got to know. Consultants, okay? Consultants who are federal contractors. They bring in their laptop. Hold on. Bear with me. Where is it? I left it in the compartment. Okay. Imagine a flash drive, okay? There you go on the side. They lose the flash drive. Somebody steals the laptop. So these people who are doing all kinds of work for whatever the federal agency is, now millions and millions of records go missing because somebody stole their laptop or somebody stole their flash drive. Okay? It's a little hard to believe this stuff happens as much as it does, but I can't even begin to count the number of times that I've seen it in the news. It's sickening. Okay? It's just one more example of how our government has really lost it. And, one of the other, okay, I have to say this part out loud, and others are making a point of it. We have a government, and I'm going to just focus on Connecticut, that has become increasingly incompetent. Okay? Incompetent. And that incompetence is also measured by their failure to adhere to principles, okay? Their failure to adhere to standards, to adhere strictly to standards of practice. Yes, these are rule-bound organizations, we get it. But somehow what we're seeing more and more is that they come to think that those rules don't apply to themselves. They enforce the rules on you, but they don't enforce them on themselves. This would have been a point Jesus raised when he complained about the Philistines. Just wanted to remind you that this is a problem that's lasted through the ages. Nonetheless, I feel that we, the people, have a responsibility to push back against this crap. Wow. Anyway. So this issue of incompetence in the state government is something that needs to be addressed. Now, again, I'll say in all fairness, about, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, the fact that many of these agencies were incompetent was becoming more apparent because it was getting worse. Okay. As a result, now under Lamont, there was an effort to try and, quote, professionalize the state agencies, get them to do a better job. And then you had these other groups who were trying to treat these state agencies like some kind of retail outlet and trying to improve the, quote, customer experience for people in the state who come into contact with these state agencies. What a sick joke. But yes, this is what they were trying to do. Have they succeeded? Maybe partially. But let me just give you one example of how bad the incompetence really is. I have a friend. She is an entrepreneur. She started a biotech company that was working on developing a cancer diagnostic product. Okay? So, in setting this up, she, of course, had to get all kinds of state permits, all right, in order to do the things they wanted to do. One of the things they wanted to do was, and by the way, this is a common practice in laboratories. I worked in a laboratory that did it, is you make your own distilled water. Okay, you have a distiller right there in the lab, and whatever your needs are, 5, 10, 15 gallons of distilled water, you run it and you make it every day as needed. What we know now as DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. It took, dramatic pause, 6 years for the company to get a clean water permit to make distilled water in their own lab. This is appalling, okay? But this is emblematic of the kind of crap that goes on in the state of Connecticut all the time. You know, and we didn't even get into the other part. Now I've got to throw that. This is an appendage. I'm tacking this on. This is an appendage. So Eric and I had this discussion the other night. Oh, I got to get back to Eric, the voter roll thing too. Eric had pointed out that there are anecdotal accounts of what we'll call an unholy alliance between police departments, drug cartels, and the local government. Okay, you could draw that circle. And then all of that is subsumed under a system of justice that is as corrupt as it gets. So the system of justice is sitting there seeing this unholy alliance, and they're kind of being told how they need to rule on a particular case. I'm sure there are all kinds of excuses for this, but this to us is just a perfect example of how disgusting the state has become with respect to how well it is run. Okay, so I just had to share that. Anyway, to get back to Eric, I got sidetracked. My apologies. The databases that are collected under Eric, okay, are then used. They're supposed to be bumped against the state voter rolls. So each state would send their voter roll to Eric, and Eric would then take these other databases and do the so-called cleaning up process. Well, it turns out that what they were sending back to the states was not clean at all. It was still crap. All right. So the red states caught on to this very quickly, and they got out, and they're not a part of Eric. The blue states that benefit from these kinds of mistakes stayed with Eric. All right. So it's 23 states now, I think, that still use Eric, and the other 27 do not. So this fact alone should be a warning, an alert, but it's not being treated as such as far as I can tell. So let it be a warning. This Eric company is only being used as a shield for blue states to continue their fraud in terms of how they mismanage the voter rolls. And in the case of Connecticut, it gets worse because that useless partisan hack, Stephanie Thomas, who's supposed to be our Secretary of State, instead, it's her responsibility. Okay, her job description requires that she, not somebody else, her, be responsible for the integrity of the voter rolls in the state of Connecticut. But oh, no, 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 no. I have outsourced that to Eric. So I cannot be responsible for whether the information is accurate or not. It's whatever they do. So now the people who want to make sure that these voter rolls are clean have an extra hoop to jump through in order to get there. So thankfully, a number of the groups are developing their own resources, putting together their own databases where they can determine who are the illegal aliens, who are the criminal records, who are the people who don't belong on these rolls but are there. This is being done independently, but you still end up in this place where, great, you have an independent authority showing how these rolls are dirty and incorrect, but nobody who's doing anything about it. Because again, the judiciary, the unholy alliance, and they realize that they have a duty to perform in order to prevent the truth about these dirty voter rolls to come out, especially and particularly in the blue states. So that's what we have in front of us as far as that's concerned right now. It's disgusting. Something has to break, something has to give. But in my opinion, it's only if you and me make a lot more noise, get out there and start agitating in many more ways. It started to happen. There's a group called ConnecticutCoalition.com. Apparently, they put up a billboard in New Haven and pointing out that there's a lot of dead names on the state voter rolls that shouldn't be there. And there's enough dead names there that could tilt a given race one way or another, especially a statewide race. So that's a problem. All right. Meantime, now I need to work on finishing up with your friend and mine, Iran. That's right, Iran. Let me just start with a factoid. I wish I could grab that chart, but see if you can follow my hand. Okay, so let's say that's 20 ships going through the Strait of Hormuz in May. Okay, and then in June it started to go up, and then I think in early or mid-July we hit a peak of 60 ships a day going through there, but then it dropped off again. I guess presumably after the Iranians started attacking again. But again, the problem is it only takes a few attacks. But I'm a little confused as to why the American Navy has not been able to do a better job. I mean, they've been stopping a lot of these things, but there are others are getting through. And quite frankly, they shouldn't be getting through, but they are. And all that's doing is creating an unholy mess. It's amazing that the oil prices have not gone up more as a result. So I'm not quite sure where we're going to find ourselves in this. But the other thing I want to report, see, I don't know who exactly is listening to me, but I want to remind you about the apparent military doctrine of Iran. The apparent military doctrine, which has been in force for at least 40 years, recognized that the United States, if they decided to invade Iran, would ultimately succeed. All right, we're sitting here looking at the cost of it, how many Americans would die, how many innocent civilians would die, and we're not happy with that. But in terms of their cold calculus, if we invaded and persisted, we would prevail. All right. At the end of that process, though, there's still this little elusive thing called victory. And the military doctrine for Iran calls for spreading the forces out as much as possible, having as many weapons in as many remote locations as possible in order to keep harassing the Americans and the Israelis as we would push into Iran. And nowhere do you see this doctrine working effectively better than the mountains along the coast of the Strait of in the Persian Gulf, okay, and into the Strait of Hormuz. The concept I presented the other night, and I'll present it again, is that it doesn't take much. You can have, I mean, this is a good example of asymmetric warfare. You can have a relatively small network. So what is this small network? Call it 100. Let's just say it's 100 caves, okay? And each cave has 2 missiles, all right? And these caves are spread out over a, say, 500 square mile area. A little hard to work on. Okay, 500 square miles, mountains, valleys, ravines, cliffs, you name it. All right, so there you are with your walkie-talkie. It's one of the Iranian lieutenants who is in charge of these missiles in this cave. He's communicating with his buddy on the next market mountain, and then the next one, and the next one. These walkie-talkies can have a range of 5 to 25 miles. So they're all talking with each other. They're able to coordinate with each other. So what you have is a loose network of 200 missiles available to be fired at any given time. So purely as a function of the kind of intelligence they're able to acquire, I mean, even if we're destroying the radar installations, even if we're destroying the shore batteries or the missile launchers, you still have this, and you can be sure that the Chinese and Russians are doing everything they can to provide intelligence to these guys, to these hypothetical guys in the mountains. So they would have a pretty good intelligence, surveillance, and communication network spread around over a 500 square mile area with at least 200 missiles to work with. And how do you think we're going to do going after that? I mean, if the thing about our munition supply going down is true, we've got an issue. I'm a little skeptical of that, but you would just find that it takes a long time to get this under control. And I'm just talking about 200 missiles. What if we're talking about 2,000 missiles? All right. And then you have a second and third layer of people in these other loose networks communicating with each other. See, networks are very hard to bring down. All right. So let me tell you a quick story as an example. In the early days of the internet, that would have been DARPANet back in the 1960s. Now understand that the part of the motivation back then in the 60s was what would we, the American government, do to survive if the Russians actually launched their nuclear weapons at us and pretty much wiped us out. So there is an argument here for what is called continuity of government. And we've heard these stories about these facilities like in West Virginia and other places where the government would go and continue underground in some capacity. Fine. But you still had the larger question of, well, what about the survivors in other parts of the country? To do this, you'd have to have, wait for it, a communication network. Well, how would this communication network work? All right. So one of the questions they asked in setting up this network, again, circa the 1960s, was, let's say there was a spy in the network, okay, and we had to eradicate him. All right, so that was the exercise. Somebody acting as a rogue agent, one of the nodes in the network, and so he would jump from one place to another. To get to the answer, ladies and gentlemen, there was no way. Okay, they could not isolate this person in the network and get rid of him. It couldn't be done. There are too many different routes, too many different combinations. I mean, you simplified the network perhaps, but when you're at this level and you're trying to maintain a system based on survival, well, you have to think in terms of surviving. Well, guess what? When you design a system like that, the components are going to survive as well, including any bad guys who've infiltrated the system. All right. Conversely, you get control of one of these Iranian networks, and now you want to degrade that network. Anything short of completely destroying that network will accomplish very little, maybe even nothing. Okay? And it's going to come down to their last capabilities for firing missiles. Okay, if you lop off part of the network, you've taken out some of the missiles, well, there's still another part. And they're able to communicate with each other about firing. And again, the cost that's imposed on us to be able to manage this is much higher than I think people realize. So, if you find President Trump and others sort of taking pause here and they're not quite sure what to do, it's because of problems like these. All right, so this is sort of asking people to be a little more patient, understanding with President Trump, even when I get impatient with him. So, what was the other part of this? All right, so we come back to the fact that ultimately regime change is going to depend upon the people rising up and resisting. We've heard a few stories here and there, but certainly the impression I have is that we have nowhere near the number of people that are needed to actually stage a revolution against the existing military in Iran, aka the IRGC. You know, a lot of people, myself included, look at this other group, right? Artesh, which is the original army that was under the Shah. Weirdly, you know, when Khomeini came to power in the 1970s, he kept the old military. I would have gotten rid of him. But I think he realized that, you know, it would be a foolish move because he wouldn't have had any military to speak of. You know, he shows up in town, he has his Shia oriented beliefs that he's going to pound people over the head with him. And so he needs enforcement mechanisms. But if he got rid of Artesh, he'd have nothing. So he had to let them stay. And over time, they stayed. So the issue here is we're led to believe, at least I'd like to think this is true, that Artesh, the non-IRGC military in Iran, would not be as ideologically committed as the IRGC. Now, what stories we've heard of defections from the Artesh ranks leads us to believe that might be the case, but it's so few. I mean, it's been like 1 or 2% maybe of Artesh that's defected. Okay, so that tells me there are a lot of them who are willing to stand and fight. And that just adds to complications for us. And then we go back to, well, where's the civilian resistance? We need it. And it just, I don't know. I think there's a part of me that just says, when it comes to these things, once again, we're going to have to accept that it takes time. And the fact that the Democrats are, for all intents and purposes, members of the IRGC in terms of how they function, it does not put us in a good position. The only thing I could throw, all right, now I'm getting into politics a little bit, forgive me, and then I got to go. The media has made a huge deal out of the Democrat Socialists of America, and for good reason, okay? Part of the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that, yes, you still have a lot of dumb Democrats, dumb, okay? They don't understand communism. They have no concept of it. They can't even address whether or not they love or hate America in any serious fashion, other than okay? Those people, all right, are going to find themselves voting for socialists without knowing it. And we could find ourselves in quite a political pickle as a result, which just speaks loudly to the fact that we have to go back to the method that was used in 2024, the late Charlie Kirk, Scott Pressler, and others, where it was all about focusing on those low information, low propensity voters. That's where your numbers were. That's where your results were. And we have to go out and do it again. Bigger and better than last time. I certainly believe that. So that's my political note. But on Iran, yes, as I've put here, Iran dies hard. They're losing resources. What's this now? Riot Tick, AI viewers, streamboo.com. What? I have no idea what that is. Unless that's some AI bot. Are you an AI bot? You don't belong here if you are. Riot Tick? Weird name. It's not clear to me, okay? We keep hearing stories, but I'm not seeing enough evidence yet that tells me that the civilian society in Iran has started to fall apart. Maybe more hardships, okay? They're tough, resilient people. So it's not going to be enough to turn into, that's it, we're done with them. My joke is, when is Iran going to have its Bastille Day? All right, if you have a government that's suppressing and depriving its people so much, it begins to sound a little bit like the French Revolution. But I'm not sure that's what we're seeing here yet. It's just in the air. It just doesn't feel like it's there yet. So that's just me. And on that happy note, I'm calling it a night, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for listening. Tell all your friends. Remember to subscribe to Yankee T News on youtube.com. And tell all your friends to listen, even listen to our old podcasts. I think I have interesting things to say. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. And I will be back Monday. Monday indeed. There is so much that's going to happen.